Welcome to Life Stories. What would you do if the person you loved most looked you in the eye and said, "You're not pretty enough to be seen with me tonight"? She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just nodded. And something inside her began to break in complete silence. This isn't a story about betrayal in the loud, messy way we expect. It's about a quieter kind of erasure, the kind that happens slowly, over years, until one day you look in the mirror and realize you've disappeared. But here's the question that will stay with you until the end. What happens when the woman everyone stops seeing starts to see herself again? Let's begin. Claire Ramsey didn't cry when David told her she wasn't pretty enough to join him that night. She didn't scream or slam the door. She just nodded once, calm, hollow, and watched the front door close behind him. It wasn't the words that gutted her. It was the casual ease with which he said them, like commenting on the weather or asking for his dry cleaning, as if she were a coat he no longer needed to bring. She stood in the hallway, alone, still wearing the black silk blouse and soft gray skirt she'd chosen hours earlier. Her pearl earrings, a gift from their 20th anniversary trip to Napa Valley, caught the hallway light as they trembled slightly, though she wasn't shaking. Not yet. Claire turned toward the mirror that lined their entry wall. Her reflection was steady, lipstick unsmudged, hair curled and pinned with quiet elegance. She didn't look radiant, perhaps, but she looked worthy. And that somehow made it worse. David hadn't always been like this. 35 years ago, when he first walked into her literature classroom in Madison to pitch a new educational software, he seemed struck by her. Back then, he used to look at her as if she were the smartest person in the room. She used to believe it too. They built a life of meaning. Children, books, jazz records, candlelit pasta on Tuesdays, evenings where she'd read aloud from Austen or Baldwin while he nodded, eyes closed, genuinely listening. Or so she thought. The slow erasure began like fog, a few missed compliments, a phone always in his hand, the first time he forgot her birthday, but blamed the work conference. The warmth faded, the intimacy disappeared, and Claire, ever the quiet fixer, assumed it was just a season. She didn't know it was a turning. That night, after he left for the company dinner, she didn't take off the earrings or unzip her skirt. Instead, she walked into the kitchen and turned off the slow cooker. The rosemary chicken, her attempt at a warm post-event meal, was moved to the fridge. She poured a glass of water, sat at the kitchen table, and stared across at his empty chair. At 8:12 p.m., a text came from Emily, her daughter. "Did Dad introduce you to the new VP? Heard it's a big night." Claire stared at the screen. Her thumb hovered over the keyboard. She typed, deleted, retyped. Finally, she sent, "He went alone. I wasn't feeling up to it." A lie, but small, manageable, necessary. She didn't know then that this lie would be the beginning of her unraveling and her resurrection. 2 weeks later, while cleaning out the guest room closet, Claire stumbled upon a manila envelope labeled Martin Work, David's middle name. Inside was a thank you letter, handwritten by Valerie Sutton, David's boss, the very same woman he'd once dismissed with a flippant, "You know how women get." The letter was dated 6 years prior. "Your speech was flawless. Several clients commented on the clarity and warmth. I know Claire helped shape it. Her influence is deeply felt. Please thank her for me." Claire blinked. She remembered that night, sitting at the dining table, helping him shape the story arc, rewriting his closing statement, breathing life into numbers. She remembered the pride in his face when he came home, but not once had he said her name. He buried the letter. He buried her. She stared at the signature, Valerie's elegant, deliberate handwriting, and something inside her cracked. Not with rage, but with clarity. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't invisible. She had been deliberately edited out. She took the letter to her study and slid it into the bottom drawer of her writing desk, not as ammunition, but as evidence. That night she didn't cook dinner. She poured herself a glass of wine and sat on the porch wrapped in a shawl, letting the cold November air kiss her face. For the first time in years, she didn't wait for David to ask her how her day was. She knew he wouldn't anyway. But she also knew something now that he didn't. She had proof. She mattered. The next morning, David noticed the change. "You've been getting up earlier," he said, sipping his coffee. "I have," Claire replied, no explanation offered. He didn't realize he was no longer the center of the room. He didn't know she was done handing him the pen to write both their stories. That Friday, Claire opened a new checking account. That Sunday, she bought a plum lipstick she hadn't worn since her last classroom debate. That Monday, she stood in front of the mirror again. And for the first time in a long time, she saw someone looking back. Have you ever realized too late that you were slowly vanishing from your own story? What would you do if the person who once adored you had rewritten you into silence? She wasn't planning an escape. Not yet. But when the next invitation came, Claire wouldn't stay behind. In part 2, someone unexpected says her name out loud in front of everyone, and suddenly the story starts to shift. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. Claire found it wedged beneath a bundle of junk mail, its heavyweight cardstock and subtle gold trim immediately setting it apart. No return address, just her name in embossed black lettering. Claire Ramsey. She stood by the kitchen island, fingers resting on the envelope like it might vanish if she blinked. It wasn't fear she felt, not exactly. It was recognition, the kind that pricks at the edges of your spine. Inside, a formal invitation. The American Women in Leadership Foundation cordially invites Claire Ramsey to join our panel on the power of unseen influence. There was a note tucked inside, handwritten in navy ink. Your voice mattered long before anyone heard it. We'd be honored if you'd share your story. Valerie Claire sat down slowly, her breath catching in her throat. This wasn't just a dinner. It was a microphone, a spotlight, an acknowledgement from the world beyond her front porch that she still had something worth saying. She set the card down beside her coffee and stared out the window at the quiet street. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then she reached for the pen that had been waiting patiently beside her notebook and scribbled one sentence in its margin. What happens when you are seen again, but you're not the same person they remember? That night, she didn't tell David. Not out of secrecy, out of necessity. She needed this moment to belong solely to her, unfiltered, undistorted, unshared. But the tension began to shift. Not externally, not yet, but inside her. A question started forming, not whether she would speak, but what she would say. Because to stand on that stage would mean confronting more than David's erasure. It would mean facing her own quiet complicity. She had stayed. She had accepted. She had smiled through rooms where she was treated like furniture. And a darker truth began to creep in. Had she edited herself too? That question came to a head 3 days later when Emily called, her voice lower than usual. "Mom, are you free Saturday?" "Of course. There's something I want to show you, just us." They met at a used bookstore downtown, one Claire hadn't visited in years. The bell above the door still chimed like a memory. They wandered the aisles, talking of everything and nothing, until Emily stopped in front of a display titled Mothers and Daughters, Rewriting the Narrative. She picked up a book, turned it over, handed it to Claire. It was a memoir. The author photo on the back was of a woman Claire's age, lines around the eyes, a soft strength in the jaw. Claire read the back cover. The author had been a nurse, a mother, a silent partner for decades, until she left it all and started writing at 60. "She reminds me of you," Emily said gently. Claire's fingers tightened around the book's spine. "Because she left?" "No," Emily said. "Because she finally saw herself." Claire opened the book and began reading the first page aloud. Her voice caught halfway through, not because the words were sad, but because they were too familiar. They could have been hers. She closed the book, blinked away the emotion, and said, "You think I should write it down? All of it." "I think you already have," Emily said softly, nodding toward the notebook always tucked in Claire's bag. And in that moment, Claire felt something both exhilarating and terrifying. She wasn't just reclaiming her voice. She was rewriting her history, and that meant deciding what not to keep. That night, she sat at her desk for hours, rifling through old journals, printed emails, and forgotten drafts. Notes about David's speeches with her handwriting all over them. Moments she had recorded in meticulous detail, hurtful exchanges, the first missed birthdays, the look in his eyes that changed from pride to inconvenience. She began to piece together a timeline, not of betrayal, but of disappearance. And then, while sorting through a stack of saved texts on her old phone, she found one from 4 years ago, from David. One she had forgotten. Dinner canceled. Bring me something if you're out. Thanks. That was the whole message. No hi. No sorry. But below it was her reply. Of course. Anything else you need? Claire stared at it, stunned. Not by his words, by hers. That version of her, always adjusting, always anticipating. That was the woman who'd been quietly erasing herself. That was the woman she would not take to the stage. A strange emotion washed over her then. Not sadness, not rage, but something closer to grief. She had been loyal, not just to David, but to a version of herself she'd outgrown. And now she had to choose what to carry forward. She printed the speech draft the next morning, and for the first time since receiving the invitation, she said the words aloud alone in her study, to no one but her own reflection. My name is Claire Ramsey. For a long time, I believed that to love someone meant to step aside. To support them meant to become invisible. But I know now, love doesn't ask you to vanish, and silence is not the same thing as strength. She folded the speech gently, slid it into her bag, and stood taller. Have you ever realized that you were the one holding the eraser all along? What would you be willing to unwrite in order to reclaim yourself? Because in part 3, Claire steps onto the stage, and not everyone in the room is ready for the version of her that's about to speak. The morning of the panel arrived quietly, the way important days often do, not with fireworks or lightning, but with an ordinary sunrise and the scent of black coffee steeping in Claire's kitchen. She stood by the window, watching a robin flutter across the porch railing. The house behind her was still, the kind of stillness that no longer unnerved her. David was already gone for the day, his tie left knotted sloppily on the bathroom counter. He hadn't asked about the event. Maybe he'd forgotten. Or maybe he was trying to pretend it wasn't happening. Claire didn't remind him. Instead, she wrapped the silk scarf around her neck, deep burgundy, the one she wore when she felt strongest, and smoothed the front of her slate gray dress. She wasn't dressing to impress. She was dressing to remember. To remember the woman who used to walk into classrooms full of teenagers and make poetry feel like electricity. The woman who held dinner parties where laughter poured like wine. The woman who had never needed a spotlight, only a place to stand and be heard. She arrived early. The venue was modern, all glass and golden light, seated high above the river with a skyline that made the city look like it was reaching upward. Inside, the chairs were arranged in neat rows, the panel table front and center adorned with modest bouquets of pale flowers. Valerie greeted her at the door, warmth in her eyes. "Claire," she said, "you look ready." Claire smiled. "I am." The event began with introductions, the usual acknowledgments and polite applause. The women beside her spoke with practiced poise, CEOs, founders, veterans of boardrooms and ballots. When it was Claire's turn, the moderator paused. "Our final speaker today is someone whose story challenged me in ways I didn't expect," she said. "Please welcome Claire Ramsey." Claire stood, her hand steady. She walked to the podium, the sound of her heels echoing softly in the room. She took a moment, not to collect herself, but to own the moment. "My name is Claire Ramsey," she began, voice clear, deliberate. "And for 35 years, I lived in the shadow of a story I helped build, but was never credited for." A hush fell. Not discomfort, but attention, the good kind, the kind she used to earn with just a well-placed quote in class. "I was the quiet partner, the editor, the woman behind the curtain. I polished speeches, raised children, kept the calendar, remembered birthdays, handled taxes, made coffee, and made it look easy to disappear. And I believed for a long time that love meant invisibility, that loyalty meant silence, that stepping aside was the same thing as support." She let the silence stretch, then softened. But silence becomes its own language, one that erases, one that teaches you not to ask for anything, not even to be seen. Claire reached into her bag and held up a single sheet of paper. 6 years ago, my husband's boss, Valerie, sent him this letter. Her hand didn't tremble. It thanked me for editing a speech that helped close a multi-million-dollar deal. She saw my work, even though I wasn't in the room. He never showed it to me. I found it buried in a file box in the guest room closet. A few gasps in the room, the kind that say we've been there. That letter wasn't painful because of what it said. It was painful because it proved something I had tried to forget. I mattered, and someone knew it. But the one person I needed to say it never did. Her voice didn't crack. Not once. And so I stopped waiting to be noticed. I started noticing myself. I opened my own accounts. I wore red lipstick again. I joined a writing group. I started saying no. And for the first time in years, I heard myself think. She paused. The room was still. Being seen is not about applause. It's about being valued without having to perform. It's about waking up one day, looking in the mirror, and realizing you don't need to ask for permission to take up space. She smiled, not from pride, but from release. I'm not here today because I rose through corporate ranks. I'm here because I returned to myself. Because I decided that invisibility is not a requirement for love, and that you can begin again, even at 62. A beat of silence, then applause. Not polite, not obligatory. Real. After the panel, women approached her. Some teary-eyed, others speechless. A few hugged her without asking. Claire received every gesture with calm grace, though her heart raced. Not from nerves, from affirmation. She stepped outside for air, letting the chill wind brush her cheek. And that's when she saw him. David. Standing near the parking lot, hands shoved awkwardly into his coat pockets. His eyes met hers, uncertain, almost small. You came, she said. I heard about the event from Valerie, he replied. Didn't realize you were the speaker. Claire said nothing. I listened, he added quickly, to your speech from the hallway. There it was, not shame, not pride. Recognition, late, but real. I'm sorry, he said, for how long I didn't see you. She nodded. You saw me today. That matters. Do you want to talk? He asked. She thought about it, truly thought. She didn't owe him a scene or a promise or her time. I think, she said gently, I've already said what I needed to say, out loud for me. He didn't argue, just stood there watching as she walked past him toward her car, the wind lifting her scarf like a quiet banner behind her. That night, she returned home alone, poured herself a glass of wine, took off her earrings, lit one candle, no music, no TV, just stillness. She sat down and opened her journal. Tonight, I didn't reclaim my place in his story. I wrote my own ending. And for the first time in years, I didn't disappear to do it. She signed her name. Full, proud, hers. What part of Claire's journey resonated with you most deeply? If this story moved you, comment 100 below. Tell us what country you're watching from. And don't forget to share this video with someone who needs to be reminded they are still seen. Thank you for watching Life Stories.